Hey friends, welcome to another week of church. I'm so glad you're with us. Hey, this is a huge week in terms of my heart for the Vineyard. And it's not actually through this sermon, it's what we're doing on Friday night. So if you're watching this in order, Friday, April 23rd at my house, which is 3235 Junction Street, from 6:30 to 8, we're gonna have an all-church hangout on my lawn where I share what's next at the Vineyard. And look, you don't need a teaser about this. It's not some big fancy thing other than the fact that, we really are setting the direction for coming back from coronavirus. I believe this is the most exciting season that I've experienced yet as a pastor. And that's because as a community, we've decided to fight for or set our sights towards some very specific things. And I'm excited to share with you on Friday about this. So I hope you can make it. And I look forward to sharing what God's doing. In the meantime, man, enjoy the heck out of this sermon. I hope you get a lot out of it and grow in your relationship with Jesus. God bless you. The series that we've been in is called Your Kingdom Come. And the idea is based on one of Jesus' most famous prayers when he said, "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." His idea was that he wanted God's kingdom to be experienced on earth in the form of what we would call culture. This week, we look at our choices and how they impact this culture of the kingdom. Here's what Jesus said. "Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few." When I think about the idea of choices and what Jesus said about the wide and the narrow gate, I actually think about my daughter Lucy, who when she was 2 years old, we recorded one of my most favorite videos of her. Check it out.
Before Savannah gets here?
Before we get a treat out of buckets.
Oh, before you get a treat out of your bucket, you gotta clean up.
Yeah. Those are all my choices.
Those are all your choices. Okay. Good choice. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Can you tell me that?
Yeah. I thought I get one more treat.
Okay.
So she's got this phrase, did you catch it? "These are all my choices," meaning these are all my choices. And Vanessa was confronting her with the choices of Halloween candy, and even at her age, she understood the power of a choice. Now in this passage, when Jesus talks about the narrow gate and the wide gate, He is telling us about the power of choice. And frankly, can I just be honest? I struggle with this in the church in relation to Jesus. When I was growing up, the way the church handled choices is, you've got the choice now that will eternally send you to heaven or hell. And there was all kinds of stress that would be created around that choice. And yet what I see in our culture today is almost going all the way to the opposite so far that it can be unhealthy, to the point that it's almost like our choices don't matter. Be whoever you want to be. Do whatever you want to do. Both extremes feel like too much. And so today I want to dig into what was Jesus saying when he basically confronted with us the idea of the choice between the narrow way and the wide way. And my prayer is that as we read this and dig into Jesus' words, he will challenge us to choose wisely. Let's read what Jesus said in this passage. "Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. But the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do mighty works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat on that house. But it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. This passage is full of distinctives. Check it out. He talks about the sheep and the wolves, the fig and the thistle, the healthy and the diseased, the good fruit and the bad fruit, the house built on rock and the house built on sand, in and out, right and left, black and white. In some ways, he's telling us that there is a difference in the result of the choices that we make. Now, how do we square with this with our spiritual lives? I know we think of God as a God of love. And so many of us have grown accustomed to God forgiving us no matter what we do. What is Jesus getting at? Well, as we look at this passage, I want to go through a few of the ideas and try to just draw out what Jesus must have meant. He uses analogies. Jesus is the master storyteller. And as we look at these analogies, I think his purpose comes alive. First, he talks about a gate, and he says, enter by the narrow gate. And I think he was probably referring to the gates that were entering through the wall of Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem was a city that even from Galilee, which is where they were at this time of this sermon, the people would have gone to Jerusalem, the big city, and they would have had to enter the gate to get into the city. In those days, the walls protected the city against attack. And so the gates were movable. You could shut them to keep people out in case of the enemies coming. But what's interesting is there were different kinds of gates. There were the big gates, the wide gates, if you will, that just everybody could come in and out of, and that's where the crowds were found. And then there was some small gates, gates that only animals and one person at a time could get through. So this would have been very specific to the people there. They would have thought immediately of this idea of the difference of gates and seen that the choice of choosing the narrow gate was different and harder than the choice of going through the wide gate. And then Jesus says, not everyone will enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, scholars have disagreed on what this means for years, but I've come to believe that the kingdom of heaven is as much a place that God desires for us to experience now, or a realm or a culture now, as it is a future sort of idea. He's saying, I think, even more simply than we may think, that our choices dictate whether we experience that kingdom of heaven or not. And then he talks about false prophets. He says, beware of false prophets, which I found, I just find troubling. If you think about a prophet is somebody that you trust to speak on behalf of God. Maybe you consider me or another church pastor to be a prophet in some way, shape, or whatever, And the thought that somebody who is speaking on behalf of God and could be false, could be deceitful, could be a wolf in sheep's clothing, is scary. Think about it. We may not know if we're following or making the right choices based on the people around us that seem to be leading us. in a certain direction. If anything, he's saying, beware. Beware that deceit is possible. We might be wrong. I looked up the word deceit and found that it means literally a catching or ensnaring, hence a misleading of a person, the leading of another person to believe what is false or not believe what is true and thus ensnare them. What a perfect descriptor of what I see Jesus getting at here. The idea that you and I could be following a way of living, a prophet, if you will, that is wrong. Again, choices, in or out, life or death. And then he goes on to say, how do we do this? Well, we look at the fruit on the tree. The Old Testament tells people how to read prophets, and it was to watch and see if what they said came true. They're claiming to speak on behalf of God, and so they said, well, just wait around and see if what they say comes true. And Jesus sort of takes it in another step in this passage. He says, look at the fruit on the tree, because a good tree cannot produce bad fruit. This gets back to the eye of deceit. I think all of us can deceive others for a while, but eventually our true self comes out. It comes back to choices. It comes back to who we choose to be and who we choose to follow. So how do we know if we are on the right choice or on the right path with our choices? Two ideas here. One is first a story from my own life. In 2014, I was at a conference and with a group of 5 guys, and we were talking about our lives. And as we were answering the questions the speaker asked us to answer, I realized that I was experiencing a troubling thing in my marriage. And that was that I was bored in my marriage. Now, this was 2014. I'd had Lucy a year before and Ingrid 3 years before. And, a lot of those days Vanessa and I are not connecting very much. And I'd realized that the passion had sort of like dwindled away and that I was in some ways looking for something to excite me. Now, that scared me. One, because I knew I needed to deal with it, and because, if I didn't choose to deal with it, really negative things could happen in my marriage. And the second thing I realized was I had to talk to Vanessa about this. I was confronted with a choice. And the choice seemed innocuous. It seemed like, I could just choose not to be bored and maybe just fake it for a while and then the passion would come back. But I knew that choice was more important than just stuffing it. I knew I had to confront it head on, or else it was going to define who I was becoming. On the way from San Diego, from that concert, Vanessa and I were driving, and she was asking me about the conference. Finally, in a nervous sweat, I finally opened up to her and I said, honestly, I realized that I feel bored in our marriage. What was fascinating is Vanessa looked at me and said, you know what? I totally relate to that, and I feel the same way. There was such a relief there. I was like, you're kidding me, really? I mean, in some ways, it was just this freedom to say, well, what do we need to do about it to fix it? And we did. By golly, we fixed it. We went after date nights. We chose to reorient our schedule to fall back in love again. And God dramatically used that choice to bring life. Now, I bring this up as a great example of, I think, how our choices lead to death or life. I believe that every day we are confronted with choices that build upon themselves, choices where God can partner with us on one hand and we can distance ourselves or callous ourselves from God on the other. And this is why I think it's so important to see how Jesus closes this section, because he says, then everyone who hears these words of mine and does them, in other words, responds to the choice that I am putting in front of them and chooses to follow me, he will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the ones who hear the words of mine and chooses to not do them will be foolish. Here's what I think this means. I think Jesus is saying, look, life and death is in front of you. Choose life. Or in other words, I have put a way in front of you, and your choices will determine which way you go. Now, this is huge because I believe that God is a loving God. I believe that He's always reaching out to us. But I also believe that today, right now, you and I, we are confronted with a choice. This series about the kingdom of God has been, what is the culture of the kingdom like? And we have confronted ourselves with very specific things. And if we are like the people who listen and hear these words and then do not follow them, we will become callous. You know, I've been in the series trying to answer the question, what does this say about the kingdom of God? And I've learned over and over that God has given us the power of choice. I've been thinking a lot about heaven and hell lately, just because I've been trying to answer the question, how could a loving God send somebody to hell? That's a hard question, frankly. You know, and there's all kinds of variance in terms of what people believe the afterlife is like. And even within Christianity, I mean, there's some people who believe in this tormenting, wrath-filled God, and then other people who believe that our souls just disappear if we have chosen not to follow God. And in my own wrestling and trying to find God in the middle of our future and the afterlife, what has come clear to me is the power of choice. See, in a world where God has given us the power of love, and love can only happen through a free choice, right? A free-willed choice. That means that if we choose against the way of love towards God, we are also making a choice to distance ourselves or callous ourselves. And what I've started to believe is that the kingdom is a place full of people who are making choices to follow the King. And whatever you want to call hell, the kingdom of darkness or the way of the enemy, is a place, is a culture where people have chosen to not follow the way of the King. And their hearts have become calloused and their minds have become darker, and it perpetuates itself, and people receive what they want. Maybe not even what they deserve, it's what they want. This is huge today for you and me. And as I think about the practicals of this passage, and I go back to the enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the way that leads to destruction, but narrow is the way to lead to life. Jesus is saying to you and I, son, daughter, today I give you the choice. Come to me, repent, say I'm sorry. Choose to confront the fact that you're bored in your marriage. Call stealing for what it is. Forgive the person who has angered you. Over and over, he's giving us choices, and I know you've got one right now, one that you're thinking of. The most powerful thing you can do towards heaven is to choose to follow God in that choice today. And the most devastating thing you could do is to let this invitation go in one ear and out the next and find yourself farther and farther away from God. Friends, let God invite you into His way and be bold and take a risk to follow Him. May you choose life. God bless you. All right, friends, it's question time. I love this part. Here's the first one. What does it say about God that He gave us the power of choice? All right, second question. I want to read a quote from Eugene Peterson. He said this: "There's a great market for religious experience in our world, but there's little enthusiasm for the patient acquisition of virtue, little inclination to sign up for the long apprenticeship of what earlier generations of Christians called holiness." Now, this is what we were talking about today. So the question I have for you is, what causes you to be faithful to the way of Jesus, or to be obedient to the way of Jesus? Last question. Now this one's personal, so you can share as a group or you can just keep this for yourself. But what choice is God inviting you to make today? God bless you. Have a great week.